All right, Cantor. Cantor. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm just passing around some healing prayers so we can follow along and get to that part of the service.
Fun stuff. Let me grab a seed door. Oh, here's a seed door. And then
We get started?
get started.
Sounds good. Get my guitar on. Mic is on this time. That's nice.
I never know what you're starting with. Come on, if I ever-
Let's do, we can do myself.
Shabbat Shalom. That's, by the way, for those of you visiting, we have a group visiting from Idaho. Shabbat Shalom is the way that we greet each other, saying, really, may you have a Shabbat of peace. And so if you are happy to be here, you can always say Shabbat Shalom as well. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. And the Shabbat Shalom to everybody who is watching this evening on our live stream service. We are thrilled that you are joining us either in person or online, because ultimately as the weather is getting a little warmer, this horrible virus is starting to get a lot better, and us being able to be together and stuff, we're seeing folks that we haven't seen in quite a while, and seeing people coming back into these chairs. And so, how about we sing from some words that we have been singing for thousands of years. Hine ma tov, how good it is for brothers and sisters to sit and come together. Turn to page 142 as we welcome Shabbat with a song of peace. Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom
We are going to turn now to page 138 because what Shabbat is about as well, especially welcoming Shabbat. Shortly I'll be going to the city of Sfat where the Friday night's Kabbalat Shabbat service was created. And Sfat is easily my favorite city in Israel. It is on top of a mountain and the highest elevated city in Israel. And there, the Jews who lived there in the 16th century said that through nature, they felt that they could experience God. And one of those ways of experiencing God was relating to things that they knew. And they always looked forward in Sfat, standing on top of that mountain, watching the sun dip behind the trees and the other mountains in Israel for the most beautiful sunset. And then celebrating having this time together. And they likened it to a wedding. And so in L'Chadodi, we sing about how God and Shabbat come together, and it's as though we are witnessing that wedding, that holiness, that special moment where we all get to be guests. So we're going to sing the refrain at the top, and then then paragraphs 1, 2, 5, and 9. We rise and face the entrance to greet Shabbat. may be seated. As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light as well. So we have our two candles here reminding us to remember and observe Shabbat, but also to be a light unto the nations of the world. And as we go into this day where we celebrate creation, to think about how next week we can help God in creating a holier world as well. Amen. Turn to page 144 for the Hatzi Kaddish. Amen. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevara Le'olamo Me'omaya Yitbarach
Ve'yishtabach Ve'yitpa'ar Ve'yitromam Ve'yitnaseh Ve'yitadar Ve'yitaleh Ve'yitalal Shmei Dekudesha
Rehu
Le'ila Mincha Birchata Ve'shirata Tushbechata Ve'nechemata Da'amiran Bi'alma Ve'imeru.
Amen. We rise for our call to worship, the Baruch Hu, page 146. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed Le'olam Va'ed. You may be seated. On page 149, let's read together at the top of the page. Praise to you, Adonai our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans into infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai.
אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל.
152.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Yitirchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם. Amen.
One of the most inspiring parts of the story of our exodus from Egypt was how, when you think about it, as slaves, we did not have opportunities. There was no opportunity to be a slave. You couldn't dream of becoming a doctor or a musician or something else. You were born a slave and you knew you would die a slave. And for so many people in the world, by the way, that's how they arrive at this country, was knowing that they didn't have opportunities where they came from, and they would have more of them here. And for me, just in general, that moment when we crossed the sea and left our Egypt behind was really an opportunity for us to recognize that we had opportunities before us, which we never had before. And when we cried out and asked, "Who is like you, God?" what we were acknowledging was, who is like you, who has created us, who has made us each in your own image, yet different in different ways, and now given us the opportunity to go choose our own fate, to go choose our own destiny. That's something that every person deserves. And so as we sing the Michamocha, we don't just recall that moment when we left behind our Egypts and went to our place of opportunity. We think about those today who might still be in their Egypt and how we can create opportunities for them as well. The Michamocha is on page 158.
פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגאלה מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, קהל ישראל.
160.
Shalom,
More than the Jewish people have kept Shabbat, it is Shabbat that for thousands of years is kept the Jewish people. We turn to Vishamru on the top of page 162. We rise for the Amidah, page 164.
האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה.
168.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. נשיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לישני העפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדם מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיה הכל.
170.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
We learn to pray as if everything depends on God, but act as though everything depends on us. And we're reminded that holiness occurs when power and goodness coexist in perfect harmony. We continue silently with our own prayers or with the words on the page. We're on page 172 through page 180. But like I said, you can use this as a time for your own personal prayers and reflections. And when you're finished, you may be seated.
The meditations of my heart be acceptable before you, oh God, my rock and my redeemer. Oh, say shalom, bimama. Say shalom aleinu. Ya'iko
At this time, we think of those who in our community and their loved ones who could use a prayer of healing of the mind, body, and spirit, and those as well who are in a period of recovery. And I always like to think about this part of our service as the one where most people connect to prayer. Because even as I was telling this group, a group beforehand today, there are folks who come here who maybe are not very into prayer, or who maybe don't have God as like the center of their theology so much, but they believe in Jewish values. But I really think that it's this moment in our service where we're thinking about someone we care about and hoping so badly that their tomorrow will be better than their today. That everyone relates to that and has had that feeling before. And some people call that prayer, some people call it something else. But ultimately, whatever you call it, it reflects what we hope to accomplish in prayer, which is creating a holier world and holiness for those who surround us. So we're going to turn now to that paper that you might have been handed before. And Cantor, if you could lead us. This week, we think of these members of our community and their loved ones. Chaim Yosef ben Shana Libby, Gila Chaya bat Mordechai Lev Begilea, Gitalea bat Masha Hana, Yitzhak David ben Aryeh, Chaya bat Sarah, Rebecca Aguilar, Mary Jane Levy Dixon, Thomas Dixon, David Dowsett, Shulamit Marguerite Shlomeris Epstein, Yitzhak Vigilski, Will Goldman, Sharon Katz, Jeffrey W. Levy, Megan Magleby, Janet S. Morley, Shari Pedersen, Ina Sable, Lorraine Sanders, Shumei Shi, Penny Spector, Robert Warners, and Judy Wolf. And if you have a name to add, when I look in your direction, you're welcome to share with our community. And if you're watching at home, you're also invited to share a name with us too. John Cook.
We
Shabbat Shalom. I might have mentioned, I forget if it was last Friday or last Saturday, because when you give 2 sermons a week, you mix up which days you talk about which thing. But I talked about how when you are a 4th-year student at the Hebrew Union College, where I went to rabbinical school, and also a 5th-year student, you give a Devar Torah sermon during one of the communal prayer gatherings of the students once a year. And this week's Torah portion, Parshat Tzav, was actually my 4th year rabbinical school Torah portion. And unlike today, where I give 2 sermons a week, every single week, so plus all the holidays, so I give probably about, or give or take, around 100 Divrei Torah a year. Since I would give only 1 or 2 a year back then, I would work for weeks on it. I would work for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and I would write down every word, and I would not deviate. I would rehearse it in front of a mirror, and it had to be perfect. And I would imagine all of my classmates and my teachers sitting there while I presented to them my Torah. And one of the things that you don't realize when you're a student, that you very quickly realize when you're a rabbi, is that things don't always go the way you plan. That's why this past week in the Purim Spiel, people were telling me, wow, Rabbi, you are so good at improv. And I'm like, I'm a rabbi. It's what I do. Things don't go according to plan, and you gotta shift like that. But I didn't know that as a 4th-year student. And so I remember getting up to give my 4th-year sermon, looking at my paper, and saying, in Parshat Tzav, we read all about the priesthood. And I'm, for one, am glad that we do not have priests anymore. And then I looked up to see, sitting in the front row, that the Catholic Archdiocese was visiting our school that day, and there were about 5 or 6 men wearing collars and black shirts sitting in front of me. And I had to go, wait, I'm sorry, not you guys, and my whole sermon got thrown off. But I stand by what I said. I think, at least for us Jews, the abolition of the priesthood was a good thing. And perhaps this is why I in some ways identify more with the Reform movement, in other ways identify more with the conservative movement, is that I don't have nostalgia for us bringing back the priesthood and reestablishing the priesthood. After all, if we had a priesthood, and I don't know if this would be a reason for some of our congregants to want it to come back or not, but I couldn't be a rabbi if we still had a priesthood, because I am not from the Cohen family. I am not a Levite. And so I couldn't be a religious leader. I'd be doing something else with my life. And I like being a rabbi. And getting rid of the priesthood actually opened the doors up for a lot more people to become leaders and thinkers in our tradition. I don't know if Rashi or Maimonides or whomever, these were our greatest Torah commentators and greatest philosophers. I don't know if they were Cohens or not. I've never heard that they were. Would we have ever gotten their wisdom if we still had a priesthood? And many people fear change in religion. In fact, I'm one of those people who at times fears change too, and thinks that some change goes too far and can be too radical. Among some of my colleagues, I hear about how they will perform a wedding that they co-officiate with a priest on Rosh Hashanah day or something, and I'm like, what? Or I hear about, I was engaged in a lengthy debate with a few of my colleagues recently when they were telling me that they don't think that circumcision necessarily needs a place in Judaism anymore. And I really disagree with that thought process. I think that having certain traditions is important to connect us to the past. And if we try to create such an open tent where anything goes Judaism, then when you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing and you cease to exist. So I understand fear and change in religion. But other decisions, I think, have been good, even if we didn't recognize them at the time, not just for individuals, but really for Judaism as a whole. And one of those that I feel was good was in 1983, the Reform movement declared its position on patrilineal descent, saying that if you have a Jewish dad but not a Jewish mom, but you are raised Jewish and identify exclusively with Judaism, then you're Jewish. And so many people I know, as a result, now have a place in Judaism and have contributed in wonderful ways to the Jewish people and have enriched us deeply and added to us without taking something away from us at all. And I guess that's what we have to look for. Are we doing something that adds to us, or are we taking away from who we are? Now, like I said, some things that we take away are maybe for the best. Like, I am personally glad that we don't do animal sacrifices anymore. I don't think I would have been a rabbi if I had to kill animals. I like animals too much. So maybe that was a good change. But we could debate all day long what were good changes and what were not good changes. And that brings me to what I think might have been the best change that was made, that progressive Judaism has made. And that was including women in our worship and in our practice. So regularly, on a Saturday morning when we were getting ready for Baruch Hu, we have exactly 10 Jewish people in the room for minyan, so that we can actually go through our prayers. And so many of those 10 are women. I remember when I was living in Israel, a friend of mine from college died of cancer. And he was Israeli, and they flew his body back to Israel for him to be buried. And so I went to the Shiva, which was an Orthodox Shiva, and they were counting how many people they had, how many men they had for a prayer quorum, a minyan. And there were 9 of us. And here there were 6 or 7 strongly Jewish women sitting right there that we could have counted as a minyan, but they said, no, for us, women do not count. We cannot count women. And then his family had to sit there waiting to say prayers for their 20-something-year-old son who had just died, while the other men knocked on every door in the apartment complex to beg a stranger to please come and join us for prayers. And I remember as I was knocking on doors, trying to convince different men to come pray with me and set aside their evening, thinking to myself, if we could just include his mom or his sister, wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't we be not only praying now, but wouldn't that be meaningful too if we were saying, you count. You count for your son. But I look too, not just at minyan, But what incredible gifts female clergy have brought to Judaism, present company included, that we wouldn't have if we continued to exclude women. And the question is, and maybe this is from my male lens, if we told Cantor Brown Levy she could not be a cantor, she could not lead us in prayer, we could not hear her voice because she's a woman, would we be just punishing her from doing something that she loves and engaging in the religion that she loves, that's so much a part of her heart? Would we be punishing her? Or would we be punishing the entirety of the Jewish people? I know the answer to that. And I mentioned Rashis and Maimonides who were maybe included because of our abolition of the priesthood. But what if there had been some female Rashis and Maimonides at that time, whose voices were maybe never recorded, whose ideas were never written down? Maybe as a people we could be much richer today had we progressed a little more quickly and been a little more inclusive. And we see this now in our own country as well. In a nation where African Americans were not allowed to vote for so long, like also women were not allowed to vote for so long, today we see African Americans and we see women in leadership positions, Republican and Democrat and independent, enriching our cities, our states, and our country. When we include others, it benefits us all. And why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because today is a very important day. It's March 18th, 2022. And even though bar mitzvahs have been going on for thousands of years, and we're going to continue that tradition by calling a young man to the Torah tomorrow, it was 100 years ago today, March 18th, 1922, that the very first young woman was called to read from the Torah in the history of our people as a bat mitzvah. Her name was Judith Kaplan. And there were people who walked out and who were disgusted that a girl was chanting Torah. And in our community as well, even 40-something years ago, a woman for the very first time chanted Haftarah. And people got up from their seats in this very room and yelled at her and stormed out. And it was in Florida that one of the first female rabbis in I think it was the early 1980s, got up to speak, and somebody stood up and shouted, a woman on the bima, that's as stupid as an orange on the Seder plate. And today, in a couple weeks, I will be one of millions of American Jews who will commemorate that by putting an orange on their Passover Seder plate. So, in this week's Torah portion, we read about the priesthood. We read about all the things they did, about how they had to carefully set up fire and not mess up the fire, or else they would be meet the fate that Nadav and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, would meet later on, where they were incinerated. We read about how they have to change their garments so that they can clean out the blood and the ashes and all the things from the sacrifices without messing up their priestly attire. And I can't help but wonder, maybe there were other people who would have done that for them, who would have found it to be a privilege, and who could have enriched us so much. So I love reading about the priesthood. It's important to know our history and to know where we came from. But every time we do, it makes me reflect on how glad I am that we have evolved, that we have changed. And in particular on this Shabbat, as we mark 100 years of women being called to the Torah, and the millions, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of girls and young women who followed Judith Kaplan in reading from the Torah. We see that some of the most prominent rabbis in our country today, Angela Bookdahl, Jill Jacobs, Sharon Brous, etc., etc., they're our leaders, and they're women. And without their Torah, we would be so much poorer. And so I hope as we reflect on the exclusivity of the past, as a people, we can be celebratory of how far we've come and all the Torah that we have today that we never would have received if we hadn't seen holiness in women and others within our community. Shabbat Shalom. I want to make a few announcements before we move into the concluding part of our service. So please check our website, especially check at the end of each month and towards the beginning of each new month, because each month at the beginning of the month, we update our COVID protocols. So please make sure that you are looking at those and following them accordingly. Tomorrow morning, please join us at 9:30 a.m. for a Reform service as Leander Guevara is called to the Bima as a bar mitzvah. This family has a wonderful family with a wonderful story about how they came to the United States a few years ago from Venezuela and had never had a Jewish community for them where they came from, and then found us. And so I'm very excited for this tomorrow. Join us as we celebrate Leander. And thank you for everybody who made our Purim celebrations this past week, especially our cantor. So wonderful. That was awesome. And so some upcoming things for our community. Learn about Hallel, Psalms of Praise, in advance of Passover on Sunday, April 3rd at 4 p.m. on Zoom. Our first Rosh Chodesh Women's Group event will be held on Tuesday, April 5th at 6:30 p.m. And we are also going to start off a 3-part series on preparing for college for your Jewish student beginning on Wednesday, April 6th at 6:30. I see my friend Marcia here. She's going to be our second month speaker on that. I'm looking forward to that as well. This one will, the first month will include folks from Hillel of Utah talking about what Jewish life on campus is like. Join us for Song of Sea, a celebration of Shabbat with choir, followed by dinner on Friday, April 8th. And don't forget, of course, to save the date for Cantor Brown Levy's consecration, weekend of May 13th through May 15th. And a couple other things not in here that I just want to mention. We're going to have a ton of stuff for Passover, a communal Seder, a young professional event, a young families event, some lunch and learn opportunities. So please keep your eye out for all of our Passover programming that will be coming up. And on April 12th at 6:30 via Zoom, we are going to have the Honorary Consul General of Ukraine to Utah is going to be speaking to our community about what's going on in Ukraine and how we can help, and he will be bringing with him some Ukrainians to share their experiences and talk as well to us. So mark that as well. So that, for everything else, you can check your emails and our website for more information. Thank you again, and again, welcome to the folks who came all the way from Idaho to join us this evening. We're thrilled to have you here, and Shabbat Shalom. We are going to move into the concluding part of our service with the Aleinu on page 586. We will pray the Aleinu on the bottom of the page. And I invite you to please rise as we open the ark.
מעשר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שמנו חלקנו כהם, ויגר עלינו ככל המונה. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
You may be seated. The light of life is a finite flame. Like the Shabbat candles, life is kindled. It burns, it glows, it is radiant with warmth and beauty, but soon it fades. Its substance is consumed, and it is no more. In light we see, in light we are seen. The flames dance, and our lives are full. But as night follows day, the candle of our life burns down and gutters. There is an end to the flames. We see no more and are no more seen. Yet we do not despair, for we are more than a memory, slowly fading into the darkness. With our lives we give life. Something of us can never die. We move in the eternal cycle of darkness and death, of light and life. This time, we think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, and those who have died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. If you hear the name of a loved one, I invite you to rise upon hearing that name. In the period of Shloshim, the 30-day period of mourning, we remember our congregant Denise Dobling and Anna Kolodkin, cousin of Larry and Laura Green. This week, we commemorate the following Yortzite's anniversary of the passing of these loved ones: Irene Aronovich, Zachary Bannon, Elaine Borman, Sidney Davidson, Susan Fisher, Samuel L. Gus, Ethel Pasternak Jaffe, Wayne Johnston, Abe Katz, Jerry Mann, Gertrude Ruth Miro, Edward Rappaport, Elise Schneider, Bedia Shaposhnikov, Marianne Shilkrat, Charles Glynn Silcox, and Sam Silverberg. If you have a name to add when I look in your direction, you're welcome to rise and share that name with our community. And if you are watching at home and you have a name to share, you're invited to rise as well and to share that name at this time. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. If you are in mourning, or is your tradition to do so, you're invited to rise as we say the words of the Kaddish on page 598. Yitkadav v'kadash shemei rabah, be'alma divrach hirtei v'imlech malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol be'Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'olam omei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal, shemei dekudesha brehu, le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nehemata, da'am iram be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, v'yasei shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. May the source of peace and peace to all who are mourning comfort the bereaved among us. And again we say, Amen. Well, do we have a concluding song?
Yes, Lo Yisagoy on 645.
Page 645. A very timely song for the world that we live in right now. Part of a vision from prophet Isaiah at the very bottom of the page of how one day maybe we can live in a world where nation shall not take up sword against nation, and never again will we know war. Turn to Kiddush on page 123. I invite you to please rise.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, orei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher קידשנו למצוותיו ורצה בנו, ושבת קודשו ויהבו ורצון מנחילנו, זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי באנו בחרת, אותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. אמן. לחיים.
Chaim. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.